Well, Israel's war against Iran is not going as planned, as if there was really any plan at all from the beginning. There wasn't. The U.S. generals that spoke up and tried to warn the president that the U.S. cannot sustain any kind of long-term conflict were fired a few weeks ago, and even U.S. admirals speaking out about our inability to carry out and prosecute this war. But those people are being marginalized, and they're being called doomers. Yeah, U.S. admirals. Okay. And the former NATO supreme commander, he's a doomer. Most of our missile stores have been exhausted in the CIA MI6 proxy war in Ukraine. That is a fact, not speculation. And we learned Monday night that the U.S. military intends to send additional forces to the Middle East to put more Americans in harm's way. A number of Americans have already been killed, many more that the Pentagon is keeping quiet. When will the Pentagon come forward and admit the truth about the Americans that have already been killed? The White House saying that bigger attacks on Iran are also coming. So that's the human toll of this war. There's also massive growing economic toll. Trump loves to boast about the economy, gas prices, the stock market, but all of that is changing rapidly, and they are as we speak. We're hearing that Iraq will be forced to cut its oil production by more than 3 million barrels a day per day in a few days if oil tankers cannot move freely through the Strait of Hormuz. They can't now that Iran has halted all of that traffic through there. It's a complete bottleneck. As of Tuesday, Iraq has decreased production from 2 different oil fields. What about the insurance side of this? Maritime insurers have canceled the war risk coverage, so that could also spike energy costs. You're going to move ships through there? Sorry, your insurance plan is no longer valid. Meanwhile, Israel attacked the Saudi Aramco oil facility in Ras Tanura in an apparent false flag operation, trying to make it look like an Iranian operation. And we're learning more about that. Meanwhile, the markets are now taking a massive hit in one of the bloodiest days, the stock market, since March of 2020. Gas prices have now jumped back over $3 a gallon in many places. Oh, and the housing mortgage rates also jumped back up thanks to this war. So all of that to say that every metric Trump loves to tell us that the economy is going well, or Pam Bondi and Epstein hearings, the Dow is over 550,000. Forget about Epstein. The Dow is over 50,000. All of these indicators are now taking a beating. Peter Schiff is the chief economist, global strategist at Euro Pacific, chairman of Schiff Gold, and who has one of the keenest eyes on all of this. And we wanted to have Peter on the show. Peter, great to see you again. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back on. And yeah, this war is going to be a very convenient scapegoat for the president, which is probably the main reason that we're fighting it. But, oil prices were already rising before the war. They were up about 20% on the year. Now they're up a lot more than that. But, we had already seen the lows in gas prices, and I think they were headed much higher, as were all prices. But now I think the big uptick in inflation in 2026, I think 2026 was already set to be the biggest increase in the CPI since 2022. But now Trump's going to be able to blame that on the war. And even though, he basically decided to have the war, he'll be able to claim that he had no choice there. So it'll be a way to divert attention from that. Plus, the economy, I think, was already weakening. The GDP numbers were collapsing. Jobs were disappearing. And so now he has another scapegoat for that.
You're a gold bug. I'm a big investor in gold and silver. So when you look at these numbers today, just gold prices, why are they in the red over the past few days here? I mean, why are we seeing this on the gold and silver market?
Well, the markets have a tendency to anticipate events. And I think it was no secret over the last several weeks that we were going to do something with Iran. The odds of an attack were increasing on betting markets. They were talking about it. There was a lot of troop movement going on. Ships were moving. So I think that gold was being bought ahead of this in anticipation. Gold, a couple of days ago, just before the war started on Friday, gold was 5,250, and it got above 5,400 initially on Sunday night. And I think what happened is the people who bought gold in anticipation of the war sold on the news. Buy the rumor, sell the fact. It's a classic trading pattern. And I think that's what's happening. But I think it's important to point out that as we're speaking, gold is still above $5,000 an ounce.
Right.
Gold is still, where, this was a record just a few months ago. So gold is still way up. And I think once the noise is over from the short-term trading, gold is just going to resume its climb and it's going to hit new highs because wars are bullish for gold, mainly because of the way they're financed. Governments tend to pay for wars by creating inflation. They run bigger deficits to pay for the wars, but instead of raising taxes on the citizens, which would make the wars even less popular, they rely on the central banks to print more money. And so you end up with inflation. And that's what ultimately drives gold is inflation. And so we're going to have higher inflation because of this war. And that's a positive for gold.
Legend, you know him well, Eric Sprott in the silver sector, legend in the silver markets, says that he thinks $300 an ounce for silver is very reasonable. It's at $83 right now. So what about silver at this moment?
Yeah, well, silver is more volatile than gold, and it took a while longer for it to move. And silver had a big move this year. It went from about $30 up to over 120. So it had a fourfold increase, which not only caught up with gold, it surpassed it. And then silver had a big pullback, and right now it's in the low 80s. But I think what's significant about silver is that it's taken out the $50 resistance that kind of overhung the market going back to 1980. So I think we've had a significant breakout in silver. And I agree with Eric Sprott that prices are going a lot higher. Eventually, sure, silver will be $300 an ounce. But I don't know how long that's going to take. It may not be, in the next several years. But obviously, it's going to go there eventually. Just because the dollar is losing so much of its value, you're going to need more dollars to buy everything, not just silver. But I think silver is going to make a new high above the 121 that it hit earlier in the year. And it could easily do that before the end of this year. But if not, if silver just gets to 110 this year, that's still a huge gain. And, it could get to 150 next year or more. But 300 is not an outrageous forecast. But, obviously, if it happens, Eric Sprott's going to be a lot richer than he is now, and right. So am I. I don't think I'll be able to catch up to him, but I'll make some pretty good gains on the typical investor.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to talk about gold and silver first because we're big proponents of it here on the show. So with that out of the way, let's talk more about the war and let's talk about oil. And then I want to talk more about the dollar, which you just brought up. So export disruptions from the Strait of Hormuz, slowdown that pushed storage to critical levels in Iraq's southern ports, of course. So you have a lot of these ships that are sitting there that can't even get into the ports. How big a cut in supply in terms of actual global production right now are, and the need for oil? So where do you see oil prices, gas prices going based on what's happening in Hormuz?
Oil prices were already cheap. Remember, when we started the year, oil was below 60. It was around $55, $56 a barrel, which was ridiculously cheap. As we're talking now, it's about $76. So it's risen now, 40% or so on the year. But it's still relatively cheap. And so I think oil prices have a lot of room to go up from here. But this particular war has the potential to really disrupt oil supply. And that is the problem. And central bank money printing is going to stoke demand. So if we have, more demand and less supply, we're going to have much higher prices. This is a war, in the Middle East, in Iran, but it's already involving other oil producing nations. And so we have no idea what facilities are going to get bombed, what refining capacity could be lost. We know they've already stopped ships. I don't know that they're not physically preventing ships from crossing the Straits of Hormuz, but the ships won't go there because they don't have any insurance anymore. Nobody wants to risk, getting sunk. So the ships are all anchored. So oil's not moving. This obviously is going to be very disruptive to the oil market.
Where do you see like a step up in production to cover this shortfall right now? Would it be in Venezuela?
I don't know. I think there already was a lot of production. I don't know that there was a bunch of spare capacity, in the U.S., in Canada. I think obviously if prices go high enough, that will unlock some production, because we're a relatively high producer. So is Canada for oil. So to really get a lot of extra production, we need higher prices to justify the cost. But the higher prices need to be sustainable, because if you're a U.S. producer and oil spikes, but you don't have any confidence that the spike is going to last, you're not going to spend the money to ramp up the production, because the high prices might not be there by the time the oil hits the market. So it's going to be difficult. So I could easily see oil prices upwards of $100 a barrel, maybe quite a bit higher, especially the longer this goes on, right?
You've been predicting, obviously, a massive crash. I don't know if we're in it now, or do you think that this is what we're seeing now is exacerbating that? Do you think that the U.S. can sustain like a 90-day crash like we saw in 2008, some sort of a big setback? Are we in a position to be able to sustain that?
Well, I don't think we've had much of a decline in the markets. I mean, even though the markets are down today, I mean, it's not that big. I mean, the Dow has already pared its losses, cut them in half from where it was earlier this morning, from down 1,200 to down 600. But even when it was down 1,200, you're like 2.5%. I mean, that's not a big drop. And, we're still barely below 49,000. So we're not that far off of the record high in the Dow. And of course, similar story, the S&P, NASDAQ's a little bit more below its high. But of course, the NASDAQ had a much bigger move up than the Dow. So I don't think the markets have even begun to price in the negative possibilities that, could be the result of this war. And plus, there's a lot of other negatives that the markets weren't pricing in anyway. I mean, we were looking at some serious economic and financial problems, and we had probably the most overvalued market in our history. So the market has been priced for perfection, and clearly what we have isn't even close to perfection when you factor in the war. Now, there may be some people that somehow are naive enough to think that there's just going to be this great outcome of this war, right? That we're just going to quickly get rid of this horrible regime, and Iran is now going to be run by much more sensible people who are finally going to, be friendly to everybody. It's going to be like a, free market, and everything is going to be great. We're going to have peace in the Middle East. And that is ridiculous. Even if we succeed in completely obliterating the current regime, how do we know that the regime that replaces it, that fills that vacuum that we create, won't be even worse than the one that we just got rid of? There's an expression, the devil you know.
Right.
And that's generally true. When you declare war on a country and you kill a lot of people in that country, not just soldiers, a lot of civilians get killed as well. You really create a lot of animosity. So the people who hated America in Iran are going to have more reason to hate America after the war than before. We think, they're all going to be celebrating the liberation. I mean, that usually is not the case. You end up creating even more enemies, and enabling them to raise up more people against you. I mean, look at the reports of the girls that died in this school. What about their brothers? And you don't think they're going to be pissed that they lost their sister? I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could say, well, it's they were hiding weapons. I have no idea, but it doesn't change the fact that these people are dead, and their relatives are not going to forget that. and they're not going to forget, who killed him.
Oh, exactly. So this idea that they're going to give up their energy infrastructure. I mean, the list of things from Steve Witkoff was like something right out of an Israeli playbook. Disavow all the allies in the region, so you can't have any friends anymore. You have to give up any energy production and nuclear power production in your country, and you have to basically kowtow to the United States. That's essentially what Steve Witkoff was going in there with, and it's not going to happen. So now we're in this protracted war, which could continue for many, many months, if not years. Iran is prepared for it. Weapons underground, thousands of Navy ships, small Navy ships through the Straits of Hormuz. Like, this is not going to be something that wraps up in 4 days, despite what the Secretary of War would like us to believe. So how can the U.S. dollar, like if we bring it back to the economy, how can the U.S. dollar be looked at if the U.S. can't win this war decisively?
Yeah, look, and I don't even know what winning the war means. I mean,
Me neither.
Can we bomb them into submission? I suppose, we can keep dropping bombs until we run out. And, one of the reasons that all the defense contractors have been rallying is because they're anticipating that Washington is going to be buying more ammunition from them.
Right. Another 20-year war, like another 20-year war that'll make them super happy.
But I don't think we can win it in the sense that, they have claimed are the objectives. We have a lousy track record every time we go to war in the Middle East. And, the classic definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and expect a different result. I don't expect a different result in Iran. It's going to be the same thing that happens all the time. Every war takes a lot longer than they claim. They thought that the war with Russia and Ukraine was going to be over quickly. About how many years has that been going on? That was supposed to be wrapped up quickly. And of course, if we're going to believe the stated objectives of this war, there is no way we can achieve those objectives unless we have troops, on the ground in Iran. There's just no other way to do it. And so then what's going to happen? I mean, we're going to put our troops there, and how are we going to get them out? I mean, we got trapped in Iraq. How long we were there? How about Afghanistan? Look, Trump actually, not only did he campaign against this kind of stuff, even before he was a candidate, he was publicly against this kind of stuff. These regime change wars and these forever wars and getting involved in the Middle East. He was the peace candidate. He was like, vote for me so we don't have any war. Right? He's like, well, you better not vote. You better not vote for Harris, because that's a vote to go to war with Iran. Well, some people voted for Harris, and yes, we're going to war with Iran, even though Harris didn't win.
And he was tweeting regularly about how people would use Iran as a distraction, use a war against Iran as a distraction. He said, watch out, Obama's going to use a potential war against Iran as a distraction.
Yes, he actually told people that he thought that a great distraction is starting a war with Iran. That was already his opinion, because he had expressed it. That, hey, if you need a distraction, if you're ineffective as a leader, if you can't negotiate, then you start a war. So he already believes that is something that you do. And now he's gone and done it. And, it's not a coincidence. Again, a lot of stuff was going on. The economy was bad, even though he was claiming it was great. All the data was showing that the economy was weakening. Inflation was rising. He just had the tariffs, his signature policy, declared unconstitutional, and rightly so, by the Supreme Court. And, the Epstein files were becoming very embarrassing for the Trump administration. And so if Trump needed a distraction, it's right now.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, nobody's talking about Epstein. No one's talking about the labor market or the weakening economy. They're talking about the war. And now Donald Trump becomes a wartime president. And a lot of presidents want to be a wartime president because Americans tend to want to rally around the commander in chief during a war. They want to support the troops. They want to support the commander of the troops. It really helped Bush out quite a bit. Initially, his popularity soared, when we were in war. So I think Trump understands that wartime presidents are popular. And I think, so he wanted to be a wartime president. So he started a war.
Well, we didn't have the false flag this time, like the 9/11 false flag to drag us into a forever war. So now,
yeah, and look, that was supposed to be about weapons of mass destruction, which we all know is a lie, was a lie at the time. That's why I think, I don't think Trump was being honest when he said that we had to attack Iran because they were about to attack us. That's what he said today at a press conference. Yeah. He said we struck them because if we didn't strike them, they were about to strike us. Right. I just don't believe that Iran would have been dumb enough to do that.
Also, they didn't have the capacity to do it. They didn't have despite Mark Levin lying on television, they didn't have the capacity to strike the United States. So,
well, of course, they couldn't. They could never strike the mainland. But could they have, fired a missile into one of our bases in the Middle East? Sure. But there's no way they would have done that. I mean, they would not have, they're attacking now our bases, let's say, in Saudi Arabia, which, of course, has really angered the Saudis because now you have Iranian missiles coming into Saudi Arabia. Of course, they're aimed at U.S. military targets that are in Saudi Arabia. But there's no way, I think, that Iran would have risked that. They would not have fired missiles into Saudi Arabia preemptively. I think the only reason they did it is because we hit them first. And now they're like, well, we got to defend ourselves. We're being attacked. Not that I'm defending Iran. I'm just saying we put them in a position where they were able to do that. But I don't believe that had we not attacked them, they would just launch those missiles into Saudi Arabia. No, because they know that's going to piss off Saudi Arabia. Plus, it's going to piss off us, and it would have made America the good guy, right? If they attacked us, that would be a completely different circumstance.
Oh yeah, that's why we love false flags.
Yeah, we would be completely justified in defending ourselves. Yeah. And in fact, one of the criticisms I have against Trump for doing this, and of course I criticized the Democrats when the Democrats did this too, is that it's unconstitutional because the president doesn't have the power to declare war. Congress is supposed to do that. And if the president wanted to declare war, he should have brought it up to Congress to, deliberate on it and to vote on it. And, to say that, well, we needed to preserve the element of surprise, that's a bunch of bullshit. Everybody knew that something was going to happen. But the Constitution, the framers of the Constitution obviously knew, that it could, screw up the surprise if we have to vote on declaring war before we do it. But they thought that that was worth it because they didn't want to allow one man on his own whim to take the country into war. And there are people that say, well, the president is the commander in chief. Yes, but he can't command the troops into a war. Congress has to do that. Once Congress does that, yes, then he can command the troops in war. But Congress has to declare it. But had Iran attacked us first, oh, okay, well, then it's like he's allowed to defend us. He's allowed to retaliate immediately. He doesn't have to seek congressional authority to fight back when we've already been attacked. Now, a broader resolution on war would still be required, but we would have been the good guys under, and there's no way Iran was going to allow us to have that high ground. Right? I mean, why would they want to create sympathy for the United States by attacking us?
Right.
Especially since they know that we've got the superior armed forces. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to attack us knowing that we've got this huge military. I mean, how could they possibly compete with our military?
Well, and the ship has already sailed once we attacked them over the summer. So we preemptively attacked them over the summer to take out their nuclear infrastructure.
But when we attacked them, we did say that, look, don't retaliate. That's all we're going to do. Right. We just did this one thing. And if you guys are cool with it, we're cool. You know, we're not going to do anything.
Right.
And they were like, they basically accepted it. They didn't retaliate. They had some, you know, retaliation they did for show. They fired some missiles at nothing. And they even told us, hey, by the way, we're going to launch these missiles. Don't worry, we're not going to hit you. So they did something to save face, but they basically let it slide, as far as I can tell.
I mean, this whole charade now, now we're past the point of charade, because now actual people are being killed and the United States is committing more troops to this region. So from an economic standpoint, I mean, look, the U.S. housing market is completely frozen right now. It's kind of
the housing market is frozen because houses are overpriced. So prices have to come down. But that creates a whole new problem, because now a bunch of people lose their home equity and they stop making their mortgage payments. And now the banks are in trouble because, you know, they've got a defaulted mortgage, and they, you know, if they sell the property, they're not going to get their money back. So yeah, we got a lot of problems, and the war is just going to make those problems worse.
What are the biggest, I'll get you out of here on this, Peter, but what do you think the biggest problems are right now for the U.S. economy, and then layering the war on top of this?
Well, the biggest problem is that we've got too much debt, and we're too dependent on the rest of the world to finance that debt and to supply us with the goods that we don't produce. We have a completely dysfunctional bubble economy that was the result of decades of bad monetary and fiscal policy that allowed this type of consumer-based consumption and debt-fueled economy to develop in the first place. But now we just have massive asset bubbles and a leveraged financial system and a basically insolvent banking system and a bloated federal government. And all this stuff is going to come collapsing down. And we have overvalued stock market, real estate market, bond market. You know, we are in major trouble. And, you know, the war just compounds that, because we now need to fight the war. And wars are expensive. Wars are just more government spending. And so that's even more debt. But, you know, they also are problematic, you know, for the economy for all such of other reasons, like what we're talking about, disruption of key supply, like the supply of oil. The only potential way it helps is if we get a big inflow into the dollar, and the dollar's rallying today, and the dollar was falling and it looked pretty weak up, you know, and now it's got a 2-day rally so far off of this war. If the war in the short run strengthens the dollar, that will help. But the dollar is a bubble too. And I think any strength in the dollar that is related to the war will be temporary. And I think ultimately the dollar is going a lot lower, and the war will just be another factor driving it lower. Because again, the war drives bigger deficits, higher inflation, and that's bad for the dollar. And of course, it puts more pressure on the Fed to print more money to prop everything up. And that is also dollar negative.
How can people, final question here, Peter, how can viewers who are watching right now protect their families financially right now? Is it through gold and silver? Where do you see the best upside for people to protect themselves during this war and just this crappy economy?
I think gold and silver are going to do well. Gold is, you know, close to 5,000 an ounce now, a little bit, you know, still trading between 5,000 and 5,100. I think, you know, around 5,000 or just below, that's really the support. So I don't think you're going to see gold go much lower than that. Silver is now in the low 80s. Silver probably has a little bit more downside into the low 70s than gold, but who knows? I mean, maybe silver will just rally from here. But I think precious metals are going to be good hedges. They're going to have good returns. I think the mining stocks are going to be even better, and they're getting really beaten up today, even though they are so profitable at the gold prices after the sell-off. In fact, even if gold and silver prices fell substantially from here, these gold and silver mining stocks would still be ridiculously cheap. So I think they're a great investment opportunity. We have a lot of strategies at Euro Pacific Asset Management that focus on the mining sector. So you can talk to our representatives at Europac.com on separately managed accounts in that sector. I also manage a gold fund. People can buy it no load at any discount broker. EPGIX is our gold fund, which invests in mining stocks. But I think also the key is to recognize that money is going to be leaving the U.S., I think, for many, many years to come. Last year, the returns on foreign stocks were about triple the returns on the S&P. And the outperformance so far this year is even greater than it was last year on a percentage basis. So I think this is early in the movement of money out of U.S. assets into foreign assets, into emerging markets. And we've got great investment strategies at my asset management company to capture that. We specialize in overseas investments, in value, in dividend-paying stocks, and I expect them to deliver, incredible returns, especially from a U.S. dollar investor's perspective in the years ahead. So we have a number of mutual funds. You can get information on all those funds at the Europac website, europac.com, or you can speak to our representatives specifically about our strategies and how we can help you incorporate them into your portfolio.
Awesome. Well, Peter Schiff, great to see you as always, as we are a few days into this war, and we'd love to have you back as this thing unfolds. I do not think it's going to end quickly. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's probably the case. I mean, I always hope for the best, though. Hopefully, there can be a quick resolution, but history, is not our friend here as far as that's concerned. It always takes much, much longer than anybody thinks.
Right.
And who knows? It's like opening up a can of worms. I mean, you don't know what the hell is going to come out, right? And everybody's always surprised. And then one thing happens, and it leads to another thing and another thing, and you have no idea what all the unintended consequences could be. Right? When you do something like this, that's why it's best to just leave well enough alone. As bad as Iran was, I mean, I think that we had it contained. I don't think they were as big a threat as they're being held out. Not that I'm defending the regime, not that I think they're good guys, because they're not. But
why is it our responsibility, right? Exactly. So,
but the thing is, we could be making the situation worse. That's what history shows.
Right.
We go in there, we stir up a hornet's nest, and then who the hell knows who gets stung. We probably could have just contained them. What Trump did with that Operation Hammer and blowing that up. All right. I mean, why can't we just do stuff like that? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Well, we could be looking at another 20 years war, that's for sure. Peter Schiff, thank you so much. Thanks for your analysis. And this thing obviously still very, very fluid. Thanks as always. We really appreciate it, Peter.
All right. Take care.